As Micah said, my name is Hillarie. I am from Minnesota, and thank you for being here this morning. I am so excited to bring a word that God has placed on my heart, and so I pray that it speaks to each one of you this morning. And so I wanted to think of a fun way for you guys to get to know me a little bit better this morning. So today I thought I would share with you a picture of my house. And I wanted to share with you 2 facts about my house. We've recently got the front yard re-landscaped and a new retaining wall because it was definitely falling apart. And the neighbors weren't too happy that it was falling apart. So we got that redone last spring. And I tried my hardest to try to capture what a Minnesota house would look like. But I tell you, my mom's Facebook page didn't help. My camera roll didn't help. But one thing I wanted to share with you that you might not have known is that in the winter in Minnesota, just like how you have to scrape your windshield off of snow, you also have to scrape your roof off sometimes. So I didn't have a photo of that, but I did have a photo of my dog on my deck with the snow, which kind of gives you a little idea. But sometimes our roofs can have like up to 2 to 3 feet of snow on it, and we'll have to scrape it off so the roof doesn't collapse. The second thing about my house that I think was really interesting when I moved in that I didn't quite realize was that I actually have 2 hidden spots in my room. And unfortunately, I couldn't fly back home to take a photo for you guys. But if you were to go into my bedroom and lift up my headboard of my bed, you'd actually find that there's shelves in there. And I keep some books or my journal in there. And then if you go into my closet and you'd face my closet where I keep my clothes, and then you'd reach up top and you actually pull out the wall, there's actually a hidden closet in there. So those are just 2 random facts about my house that I wanted to share with you. So now that you know a little bit about me, I want to share with you a little bit more about Paul and what Paul is wanting us to understand today in Ephesians 3 before we dive into the verses. So I think there's 2 important contextual pieces to consider when we look at this passage today. And the first one is this. We want to find out what else Paul has prayed for in the book of Ephesians so far, because today's passage is Paul praying. And so if we think back to a few weeks ago, Ani preached on chapter 1 of Ephesians, and she talked about how Paul was praying that we would come to know who God is through our hope, riches, and power that God has. Paul wants us to know Christ better in chapter 1. The second thing to know is what's ahead. We're just concluding the first half of Ephesians chapter 3 today, and we still have 4 through 6 to go for the rest of the semester. And chapters 4 through 6 are all about the practical ways to live out the calling that God has placed on each one of our lives. And so with that in mind, let's take a look at what Ephesians chapter 3 has to say. For this reason, I kneel before the Father, from whom every family in heaven and on earth derives its name. I pray that out of his glorious riches, he may strengthen you with power through his Spirit in your inner being, so that Christ may dwell in your hearts through faith. And I pray that you, being rooted and established in love, may have power, together with all the Lord's holy people, to grasp how wide and how long and high and deep is the love of Christ, and to know that this love that surpasses knowledge, that you may be filled to the measure of all the fullness of God. Now to him who is able to do immeasurably more than we ask or imagine, according to his power that is at work within us, to him be the glory in the church and in Jesus Christ, through all generations, forever and ever. God, I pray for each person in this room this morning, God. I pray that you would speak a word to them, Lord, and you would speak through me in the area of your life, in the area of our lives that you want to speak to. Lord, be with us this morning. Amen. From Paul's prayer, we can learn that Christ must settle in our hearts before we can live out the call he has for us. You see, in chapter 1, Paul was praying that we would come to know Christ. And in chapters 4 through 6, we noted that Paul wants to teach us how to live out our calling. But Paul is asking us that we get this right. We get this right today before we can live out our call. Christ must settle in our hearts before we can live out the call he has for us. Now, I think the word settle can be a little bit of an uncomfortable word. We saw in the chapter that Paul used the word dwell, and settle is a similar word, and it can mean to take over, to invade, to govern or lead, or adapt a more steady, secure style of life. It takes humility to let Christ come in and settle in our hearts, to allow him to lead in every area of our lives. But it ends up in a more secure style of life when we allow Christ to settle in our hearts. I told you a little bit about my house earlier today, and I think this concept of a house can help us better understand what it's like for Christ to settle in our hearts, for somebody to come and move in. I've actually moved 7.5 times in my life, so I know a little bit what it's like to move in to a new place, a new neighborhood, and you're probably wondering, what in the world do you consider half a move? Well, I lived in a lot of apartment complexes, and on one particular one, we lived on the second floor, and the people beneath us have moved out, and we had the opportunity to move into that one. So while my mom was going down the stairs, I definitely would never throw anything over the balcony. But it definitely made things easier because I 100% did. And I would take a blanket, I'd throw all my clothes into it, just keeping them on the hanger because I'm gonna hang them up in another 5 minutes anyway. Tie them up, toss them over the balcony, and then run down the stairs and collect them from the yard. I thought it was the best move ever. It was the most simplest one. And we lived right on the first floor next to the pool. So it was pretty great. And so if we think about this idea of meeting Jesus, when you move into a new neighborhood, you maybe hear neighbors talk about who Jesus is. You yourself might see him walking in the neighborhood. But eventually there comes to this time where you must meet him. You meet your neighbors. And that's what Paul was talking about in chapter 1. We come to know Jesus. When you come to know Jesus, maybe he's on your front porch. And eventually you step into that relationship with him when you open the door and invite him into the entryway of your house. Then as you get to know Jesus more and enter into a relationship, he comes over for dinner. Maybe you watch a movie together. You see, each space in your house, each room of your house represents a different area of your life that you've allowed Jesus to come and settle in, that you've allowed Jesus to come and lead. Christ settling in our hearts means that we allow Jesus to come into every area of our life and we allow him to lead. So if we must choose to let Christ settle in our hearts before we can live out the call he has for us, what are the benefits of letting Christ settle in our hearts? Today, I want to share with you 2 benefits there are to letting Christ settle in your hearts. The first one is this: you get to know the love of God. Let's look at verses 17 and 18 to see what Paul says about this. And I pray that you, being rooted and established in love, may have power, together with all the Lord's holy people, to grasp how wide and how long and how high and how deep the love of Christ, and to know that this love surpasses knowledge. Paul is saying that when we let Christ settle in our hearts, we get to know the love of God. But what exactly is the love of God? I think we talk about it a lot in the church, but I wanted to share with you what exactly the love of God is. 1 Corinthians 13 says that God's love is patient. It's kind. It does not dishonor others. It is not self-seeking. It is not easily angered. Love does not boast. It is not proud. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always preserves, and God's love never fails. I think these verses in 1 Corinthians 13 points out a key concept about God's love. God's love is directed towards others. It requires setting aside our own desires and interests. To truly know the love of God means that we set aside our desires and we look for ways to share God's love with others, expecting nothing in return. I think Jesus modeled this so well in his life of ministry when he would constantly love people and never expect anything in return. And I think we are to do the same. If we look at the rooms in our house, the areas in our lives, we can ask ourselves, where do we need more love? Where are we not patient? Where are we not kind? Where are we not honoring others? And we need to seek our own desire. We need to not seek our own desires and let Christ settle in that place where there's not love and begin to show that love for others. I want to share an area of my life, a room in my house that I kept hidden from others. You could say it's really similar to that closet that I pulled out at my house. And for me, that's my emotions. The other week, I was sitting in class, overcome by so many assignments that I didn't see coming, a list of a few things to get done before our SAB meeting. And one that hit a little harder was some things that my friends and a professor were walking through. My friend's mom was experiencing surgery that day, and I'd found out that my professor's brother had had a stroke, something that my family's familiar with. You see, most of the time I would often just push all of that aside, and I would just keep going and keep going and keep going and not acknowledge what I was feeling. But that day in class, I couldn't. It was so strong, and in that moment, I said, Jesus, I need you to come settle in my heart. I need you to see this area of my life and come in and lead in that way. And God showed up. In that moment, I felt in my spirit God say, I do see you. I love you, and I see what you're going through. But I think the even better part about that, I love that I got to know the love of God. But when I got to share that with others, that's when I felt like I truly got to know the love of God. My friend's mom, who was having surgery that day, I had a chance to go talk with him and just share with him, I understand what you're going through. I know that your heart aches for this, but I'm here, I'm with you, and God is faithful. I got to have a similar conversation with my professor, and it was so amazing to see how God used an area of my life where I choose to let God settle that I don't want to show others, that I want to just ignore, but I invited Jesus in, and he showed up. Benefit number 1 was we get to know the love of God. When we let Christ settle in our heart, we get to know the love of God. Our second benefit is this: you experience entire contentment. Verse 19 says this, that you may be filled to the measure of all the fullness of God. The fullness of God is entire contentment. To simply put it, it's being complete and entirely content. When we let Christ settle in our hearts, we experience entire contentment. But what is the fullness of God, and what is being entirely content? I think about the different things that we try to fulfill ourselves with. Maybe it's recreating the best TikTok. I know I've had some good memories. The one where driver's license came out and you scooted your friend. That one was one of my favorites. Or dancing at a hotel. That's on the rooftop balcony. That was some good memories. I think other areas of our lives that we try to fulfill ourselves with are having the highest grades, achieving things in school, being the best on the athletic field, or even sometimes in our relationships with friends or others. But those are all things of this world. Those things will fade, they won't last, and we're left with nothing, starting this cycle all over again, trying to chase after something new to fulfill us. But instead, I think that experiencing entire contentment comes when you change your perspective and you have a new set of priorities. We should have this perspective from God's point of view, from the view that allows us to have Christ settle in our hearts. This perspective doesn't think about what we should have, having or achieving the highest thing or possessing the best things. But we should change our perspective to think, what is God leading us to do? Fullness and entire contentment comes when we're with God, spending time with God, and knowing what he's leading us to do. When we allow Christ to settle in every room of our house, following his leading, we experience entire contentment. You can look at the different rooms in your life, the rooms in your house, and see, where do I lack completeness? Where am I not finding fulfillment? And to experience that, we have to adjust our priorities and change our perspective of not what can I have and gain, but God, what are you asking me to do? That same week where I was able to show the love of God and know the love of God of my friends, I also had quite a shock when I had to realign my priorities. You see, those assignments came out of nowhere, and I definitely didn't know how I was going to read 2 entire books and write 2 papers on it. And God showed me that I needed to realign my priorities. I needed to say, even though for me, my thing that I chase after is achieving things and having good grades, I needed to say, you know what? My priorities need to be different. I need to put God first and then worry about school. And the really cool thing was watching God show up that week as that happened. You see, Thursday came around. I had turned in one of my papers, but I still had one more to go that included reading 4 chapters. I don't know if any of you have ever been there before, but I also needed to stop over at my friend's apartment to go grab her Nug keys. Her van is called the Nug because we had an SAB event that required 325 pumpkins, and I didn't think my little car was going to fit all them. So I stop over there. Come to find out, I thought they too were going to be doing homework. They were indeed playing Just Dance on the Wii, something that I actually have never done before, but I absolutely love playing the Wii. And I decided to join them, and it kind of felt like a little preparation for Screaming Eagles Week because we only had 2 remotes, so 2 people were playing Just Dance, and then the third person would take turns just lip syncing the entire music and song. And so we ended up strumming a guitar in the middle. I ended up singing into a spoon, throwing pillows, and just dancing on her couch. But let me tell you, that was the best night of my life. So then I think I'm good. I'm like, okay, it's only like 9 o'clock. I still got this. I have 3 hours and 59 minutes to do this. So I take my book, I take my laptop, I sit on my couch next to the window. I open up my book, and I kid you not, I read the first sentence, and 3 of my roommates walk in and go, "Do you want to go to Dairy Queen?" And let me tell you, I was already thinking about Dairy Queen that night because I know we talked about it, but in my head, I was like, well, they're not back. It's 9 o'clock. I doubt we're going to go. But I was already thinking about exactly what kind of blizzard I was going to order. But indeed, I wasn't able to get that one because they didn't have the right ingredients, but I got a good blizzard. And I tell you this story not to tell you about the fun that I have with my friends, but when I chose to put Jesus first and say that, God, you matter more than the grades that I achieve, I experienced entire contentment while hanging out with those friends. If you asked my friends even a year ago or even any other week where I didn't choose to put Jesus first, they would have told you while I was hanging out with them, I was thinking what I was going to write for my paper before I even read the chapters, which kind of seems silly to not even know what you're going to write about. I'd be worrying about it the whole time and not being fully present with them. But in both those moments of dancing and laughing my head off and enjoying some good laughs while eating Dairy Queen, I felt the entire contentment that can only come when you allow Christ to settle in your heart. We must allow Christ to settle in every room of our house, following his leading so we can experience entire contentment in all areas of our lives. So we've talked about the 2 benefits of letting Christ settle in our hearts. You get to know the love of God, and you get to experience entire contentment, the fullness of God. Paul wants us to get this right before we move on to what other students in the college ministry will talk about in chapters 4 through 6. So what can we do today to make sure we get this right? I invite you to reflect on these different ideas that I have for you today and continue to ponder them throughout the week. But I also recognize it does take humility to let Jesus come and settle in every area of our lives. I didn't want to invite Jesus or share my emotions with anybody. I didn't want to say, okay, I won't put as much pressure on this assignment and I'll choose to put Jesus first. But let me tell you, God promises to give you the strength through his Spirit to do this. So let's take a look at some rooms in our houses, the areas in our lives. What are you hiding from people? What are you not sharing with people? What is your hidden closet? Or what's the secret compartment underneath your headboard? Let's first look at love. What areas are you not knowing the love of God? What rooms in your house need the love of God? I shared with you today that it was and still is for me sometimes my emotions, but when I allowed Jesus to come and settle in that room of my house, I got to share the love of God with others and connect with them. Where in your life do you need to experience and know the love of God? A love that is patient, a love that is kind, and a love that never fails. My second question for you to think about and consider another room of your house is this. What area of your life are you not feeling content? For me, I was focused on achieving things in school. I had to allow Jesus to settle in my heart and put him first, to truly feel contentment when even the simplest thing of hanging out with friends. Where in your life are you chasing and chasing but never feeling complete or entirely content? Is it in your relationships with others, your finances, or even school? I ask you to consider both of these questions and think about it this week and choose one, maybe two rooms in your house that you're going to invite Jesus to come and settle in so you can live out the call he has for us, so we can all together live out the call he has for us. When we allow Christ to come and settle in our hearts to lead, we adapt a more steady and secure style of life because we get to know the love of God and experience entire contentment. Would you pray with me? God, thank you so much for each person in this room. I pray this week and today that you would give each one of them your strength and courage to examine those hidden areas of their life, those rooms in their house that they don't want anybody to know about. God, but would they have the strength and confidence to invite you in? I pray this week, Lord, you would show up in their lives to show them the love of God and to show them what entire contentment can look like. Now to him who is able to do immeasurably more than all we can ask or imagine, according to his power that is at work within us, to him be the glory in the church and in Christ Jesus, through all generations, forever and ever. Amen.